Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Discovering Real-World Innovations in Clinical Trial Supplies That Might Mitigate Risk While Saving Time and Costs. My name is Sonia Hunt, and it is my pleasure to be your X Talks moderator for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, and that's found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require assistance, please contact me at any time by sending me a message using that chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available to you for future streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank TrialCard, who developed the content for this presentation. TrialCard is a technology-enabled healthcare company with a clinical trial division that is innovating for clinical operations and clinical trial supply professionals. They seek means of faster administration of everyday operations to meet FDA mandates to find efficiencies in clinical trials that will save time and resources. RxStudyCard is the first innovative virtual clinical supply service implemented by large to startup pharma and biotech sponsors and CROs who are conducting clinical trials where providing patients medications and supplies through retail and specialty pharmacies is appropriate. RxStudyCard reduces the supply process steps, requires less employee time, eliminates supply waste, has fewer risk, and saves money. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Our first speaker is Rudi Grant, Principal of RG Supply Chain Consulting, Inc. Rudi has 20 years of experience in various business life cycles, ranging from startups to IPOs to Fortune 100 companies. He has a strong emphasis in the pharma, biotech, and medical manufacturing, from preclinical throughout the various phases of the clinical stages, as well as leadership experience in pre- and post-commercial launches. In his career, Grant has successfully launched several drug products and supported many clinical studies at all stages of development, which eventually lead to commercialization. Our second speaker is Terry Walsh, who is the owner of Walsh Pharma Consulting. He brings over 30 years of pharma R&D expertise in the clinical supply chain and leading the development and introduction of innovative cross-industry collaboration tools. Previously, as Senior Director of GlaxoSmithKline, he led the pharmaceutical industry effort to develop a consortium to share medications for research as well as the use of e-labels for medication. He also led the GSK effort to move to external supply chain model. Much of his working career has been spent in the clinical supply chain and related areas. Terry earned his pharmacy degree at Philadelphia College of Pharmacy. He holds an MBA from Drexel University. He also has published numerous papers and articles. Our third speaker is Tom Heck, who serves as Senior Vice President of Clinical Trial Operations at TrialCard. He has over 25 years of pharmaceutical experience in sales, sales management, marketing, licensing and acquisitions, clinical development, and corporate leadership. Tom joined TrialCard in January 2019 and has spearheaded the growth in the TrialCard's clinical trial services, a growing segment of the business, focused on the early part of the patient journey that leads to TrialCard's commercial offerings. And now, before I hand over the controls and mic to Tom, I'm going to launch the first poll question, which you'll see appear shortly on your screen. And there it is. You should see it now. Your participation will be greatly appreciated, as this is done in real time, and I'll be able to share the results with you right away. So if you could please go ahead and please make your selection. And it's a very simple question. Please tell us about your position. Is it clinical operations, clinical supply, project manager, procurement vendor management, or clinical trial innovations? Your participation would be greatly appreciated. I'll give you about 5 more seconds. Looks like we have the majority of everyone has voted, so I do appreciate that. Thank you very much. I am now going to close the polls and share the results. And that's the results right there. 8% clinical operations, 33% clinical supply, 25% project managers, 13% procurement vendor management, and we have 21% at clinical trial innovations. Thank you everyone for participating in that poll question, is greatly appreciated. And now I'm going to pass over the controls to our first speaker, and that is Tom. And Tom, when you are ready, you may begin. I'm going to release your mic, and you may begin.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining today. I really appreciate your attendance in the midst of a world that seems like it's in a bit of crisis at the moment. But thank you for taking time out of your busy day. First, we're going to be discussing discovering real-world innovations in clinical trial supplies, something that TrialCard, through acquisition, has been involved in now for approximately 9 years. It's a time when we're trying to prove that we're agile and effective in our approach. So we have developed some efficient processes that help to save resources of our clients. With that, we're going to take a bit of a deviation from what we planned originally several months ago when we put this WebEx into place, because quite frankly, all of our worlds have just changed significantly. And first, I want to thank all of our guests for coming. We know that in the clinical arena, clinical operations and clinical supplies, everybody's lives have just changed dramatically with a lot of our trials possibly in flux. And with that, I want to also thank our two speakers that are in guests that are going to be with us today, both Rudi and Terry, for their time, because we know that they've shared a lot of their current experiences just in the last 30, 45 days about how this virus crisis, if you will, has put an ominous burden on clinical supply and operations professionals like all of us. So for that, we want to thank you all for coming. This is intended to be educational about a process and innovation that we've developed and innovated here within the TrialCard walls. Also want you to know that we are practicing social distancing today, and we are in multiple locations. So while we can't look at each other, Terry, Rudi, and myself, and we can't see you because we can't be at educational conferences right now, we know that it's the best practice today to do what we're doing, which is holding this via webinar. So thank you very much. And we hope that this will be engaging. And to start off, I think the best way to get moving in this is let's talk first about COVID-19 and the outbreak and what it's actually doing, and maybe some of the things that our two guests, panelists, are seeing working within the field. So I'd like to start off first with Terry, who spent, again, as you just heard in the introduction, time at GlaxoSmithKline in clinical supply. He's an industry veteran, and he works as a pharmacist on the weekends to help patients, treat patients, and do that in a federal and state mandated way. Terry also spent time at Transcelerate, which is our industry consortium that you heard about. So he's had a broad experience seeing what other companies do within their walls. So Terry, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Tom.
And you're welcome. So the first question I had for you is, kind of tell us about the clinical supply challenges that you saw prior to the virus in regard to some inefficiencies, and maybe now what are you seeing in those than the challenging days that we've most recently had?
Excuse me. Well, I guess talking about the previous days, pre-pandemic, think there was a lot of focus on the supply chain, on the clinical supply chain, as far as making it as efficient as possible. Back in the quote old days, we used to do 400% overages, and we used to go. It was just make sure the drug or the patients and the subjects do not run out of drug, or make sure there's no issues. There was even one point we actually sent double just in case one device failed. We'd always send 2 devices, even though we needed 1. So, but some of the effects of that is it pushed out our supply chain, especially on the chemical manufacturing, the API side. We were 18-month backlog. So even if new studies were ready to go, we still had to wait 18 months, so it would go through the whole process of getting the API created and made and manufactured, the tablets and or capsules or devices. So it was really just, it wasn't possible to keep going on with this. So went ahead and did a lot of efficiency working. Today, boy, every supply chain node is affected by the virus and the pandemic. Whether it be the supply as far as either from the manufacturers or the CMOs, just trying to get the product into the depot so we can send it out has been, a bit of a challenge and has really slowed down. And then getting it from the depot to the sites for dispensing has been a heck of a challenge. There is so many sites. We started out with helping a client run 3 studies, and it was about 150 sites. And yeah, there was some duplicates in there, of course. But frankly, we got to the point right now where I had a shipment going this morning to Ohio State, and they said, stop the shipment, we're closed. It's just like everybody's been sent home, we're working from home, and nobody will be there to receive the shipment. So that's actually somewhat common in the last 2 weeks. I said we've had about 6 sites just shut down. And I don't mean totally shut down as far as like you're never going to do supplies again, but just as of right now, the personnel working from home or the medical personnel the resources have been transferred into acute patient care in the hospital parts. So it's really amazing how much of a difference it is. So we're looking on how are we going to get the product to the patient, the clinical supplies, and we're working with couriers to go from the site out to the patients, and of course you have HIPAA concerns. And we're also really looking into quite a lot right now as far as doing direct to patient shipments. I know that's quite a hot area right now as far as doing that, but I think the FDA has opened up.
Look, if you don't mind me interrupting for a second, Terry, you just mentioned a minute ago that there, in the old days, so to speak, there used to be 400% overages. What
Yes.
are the overages? What were they looking like prior to the this virus outbreak? What would you say would be more typical of the overages a clinical supply group would have?
Probably 25% plus or minus, maybe even a little bit lower, depending on what the product and the cost of the manufacturing cost of goods.
Great. Okay. Very good. Well, let me flip that over to Rudi. A similar question. Rudi, talk to us about the clinical supply demands that are now impacting your colleagues, with social distancing due to virus. I mean, you're working with multiple people. You've been in multiple small to mid-sized pharma companies working in the supply arena, in the clinical supply arena. Tell us what you're seeing.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, for having me on. The COVID-19 virus has really disrupted the supply chain entirely. I mean, you've got patients not wanting to come to sites for their standard visits. You got sites prematurely closing down temporarily. So, having to redirect your supply chain is now a primary focus. You're starting to see a lot of risk mitigation strategies being applied, whereas before you probably didn't have one.
Rudi, did we lose you there?
Yes. No, I'm on.
Okay, you're still there. Great. Okay. So you're just saying that they didn't have really much of a risk mitigation strategy prior to?
No. And now a lot of companies are scrambling to try to figure out how to resolve the, the patients, making sure that they get drug, whether it's, depot to patients or if it's shipments from site to patients. Just trying to get drug to the patients is the end goal. And, it's disrupting the entire supply chain because typically companies don't think about, having direct to patient shipments. It's more of patients coming into the sites and drug being available at the site.
No, that's fantastic. So one of the things we're going to do on this webinar is we're going to come back to this COVID-19 thing at the end. We've got some specific questions, things that have already come in from either clients of ours today or that our consulting partners have brought to us. And we're going to come back to that. So, and I have a feeling there may be some questions that come out of this, toward the end of this discussion. Let me go ahead and move on. Thank you both for the answers and just, kind of what an assessment of what's going on in the marketplace right now. Prior to this situation happening, right, we know that Scott Gottlieb, the ex-FDA commissioner, he had challenged the industry and he actually kind of criticized the industry, saying there's a continued reluctance to adopt innovative approaches. one of the things that he really challenged us to do is to look for things that were new, novel, agile, more effective, and to streamline this development process and bring things to a point where it was more cost effective, more resource friendly. And that was a challenge that he published on his exit in March of 2018. So with that, we thought it would be very appropriate to kind of speak to that. And that is really a part of what we're considering here. So this next slide speaks to some of the inefficiencies that we noted through some of the key publications that we monitor, that we watch. You can see that, if somebody's to use a site reimbursement model, it can take 4.5 months just to get the site reimbursed. Just to the right of that, you can see that most of these sites keep less than 3 months of operating cash on hand for the ownership of clinical supply, the purchase of it, and local sourcing. So with that, we've got some other challenges that we see in the marketplace as well. I won't read all these to you. You can see them on the screen, but I think one of the things that's interesting is it takes 6 to 7 months to start up. It takes a long time in a world that's so digital and trying to operate at lightning speed. We also know that on the flip side of that, on the back end of the study, it's taking 50% longer to complete a study. Just this week, we've had at least 2 of our clients extend their studies for an additional 6 or 12 months. We know the R&D costs that are associated with the supply chain and logistics are going up. When we dive into all the meat and potatoes behind that 25%, it's things like cold chain, it's biologics and the special handling and shipping that occur. All these things make it more expensive. And then in the center of this screen, you can see that 19 out of 20 products being developed in 2020 are requiring that extensive management because they're biologics, rare disease, orphan disease type drugs. And we see that this complexity has just driven through the roof to a significant degree. With that, we know that it's time to think about innovating, and we're asking ourselves on a regular basis, is it time to change, what we're doing? So with that, I'd like to ask again our guest panelists, when you see the slide that's up now that Incenduit in their review of clinical studies, they're saying that 62% of the materials packaged and released were never used, never made it to a patient. Everything from contingency stock, miscalculations, and these potential stakeholder negligences, things that just happen through that supply chain. It could be for delays and other reasons, or study stops early. I would love to hear from our panelists when we're speaking to these inefficiencies. Rudi, let's start with you this time. Are there any thoughts and maybe some primary examples that you could share with regard to these inefficiencies? And I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll flip back one slide if there's anything there you want to comment on, or if you just have a real world experience, things that you're seeing that are just inefficient that, like Dr. Gottlieb, you would say, this is an area I'd like to see change. So Rudi, I'll call on you first.
Yeah, I've seen this occur in several companies with various studies. There are several equations that go into the planning of the drug supply, from patient enrollment to expiration of drug and lead times, sourcing, labeling, eventually a QA release. So at the end of the study, you realize how much drug you've compiled, and if you have drug sitting there, all that added cost that you put into it goes to waste. It's not just the drug cost as well, but I've seen companies throw millions of dollars away.
What do you think is the most significant percentage of product that you've seen or heard of from your colleagues just thrown away or just becomes part of the waste process on the high end?
Oh, I would say, yeah, on the high end. I mean, to Terry's point, ordering 400% over. I mean, I remember those days. I've seen that, but easily double the amount of forecast being tossed out the window, and you're talking about a couple $1 million being tossed, and you're not talking about just the comparators. You're talking about the supportive meds, the rescue meds, and all the work that you put into the QA release, the labeling operations, and the sourcing. It's just all costs that you cannot recoup.
So if we were to say 2019, if you kind of had to give a guesstimate from the most current year, an average that you think would likely be thrown away based on your experience, your consulting practice and whatnot, what would that look like in a percentage?
I guess in the current state of the world where, companies are being a little bit more conservative than what it used to be 10, 15 years ago, you're starting to see maybe 25%, maybe 40% of your drug going to waste. If you're sourcing in the open market, you're probably going to have more waste because you're, at the mercy of expiration dating and limited supply. So you've got those challenges too, but I'd say easily 25 to, up to 40%.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. So, and Terry, how about you? Standout example or just some general thoughts about some of these inefficiencies?
Well, I think the one is, going on to what Rudi had said, you look at 25 to 40%, but you look at the cost of the supplies these days. Gone are the days where you're doing a high blood pressure study and you're dealing with, 30 tablets a month for a patient once a day kind of thing, to, all the biologics and the different things, and we're getting into cell and gene therapy, the costs of doing that as far as, wasting that kind of material. We had a study, one of my previous companies, where we were doing, it was 2,000 patients in an anemia study. And so we were comparing it against the other anemia products out there, Procreate and Aranest. And the enrollment was supposed to be the standard 45 degrees, one patient per site per month. And what had happened is the enrollment, that was, day one, and day one, the enrollment exploded into 5 patients per site per month. So we didn't have good enrollment projections, which is very common, to be perfectly honest. And it threw us into chaos as far as trying to get more product in. Where's the product going? Because you also have to figure out it's cold labeled, so we didn't have any stability date on it. So I hate to say it, but it's somewhat of the normal way of supply chains. It's not just any particular study, but it's, the data, the communication as far as exactly what's happening seems to be a little bit slowed down the bottom of the line as far as getting to supply chain. And we had to get, we wasted probably at least $10 million worth of product because, we either ordered it early or didn't have it in time, and then ordered more than we thought we needed because of input errors into the spreadsheets and things like that. So I would say that's easily, and I look at your slide here, is the miscalculations. I think that's
right.
That's a big part of it.
Okay, that's good. Well, no, thank you both for that. With regard to the challenge that Dr. Gottlieb put upon us, specifically we're talking about our study card, and we've tried to be as educational, but the next 3 or 4 slides, I'll be honest, are going to be a bit more of where TrialCard has come from and what we've developed. And I'm going to show you a couple slides here so that we can put a framework around what we'll talk about here in just a few minutes. We've got quite a few case studies that we're going to tear through here and let you digest those. But he said specifically, reduce some of these steps, make this thing more agile, eliminate waste, save some lead times, and overall, this is really going to help with cost. So what TrialCard developed was this RX study card. And you can see a picture of a sample of what that might look like on the right-hand side. And if any of you were to pull out of your wallet right now an insurance card, your personal insurance card that your employer has given you or that you purchased through the exchange, you'll notice that the numbers and what's on this card looks just like your insurance card. So it functions like an insurance card. It basically delivers your comparators, your standard of care, rescue medications, ancillary supplies, everything from needles to sharps to cotton balls, gloves, masks, you name it, and medical devices as well. If a pharmacy has it, we can provide that particular product. To date, we've served the numbers that are on the screen. I won't walk you through all of these, but we've taken the smallest study with 1 patient all the way in the second bubble to the third bubble to your right, where we've had medications on formulary, one drug, all the way up to 5,400 drugs. We've had one patient all the way up to 1,400 patients. And you can see the pharmacy transactions. And so this slide is really telling you we have a proven approach that meets what Gottlieb stated in his challenge and in his request. What happens with that card is laid out here, so you can understand a bit of the process. Our whole presentation won't focus on this, but just so you can understand how this works, in step one, TrialCard creates a very specific study-oriented ARC study card. We program it in the background, much like a PBM or a pharmacy benefit manager would for your employer healthcare plan for your pharmacy benefit, and it's programmed onto the card so that only what's programmed on that card is what can be or will be dispensed to the patient through the study. Step two, we ship the cards, a supply of cards to each site. Each site gets a number of cards that are individualized per patient, and the site then writes a prescription for the study protocol medication, gives them the card. Step three, patient takes that either to the retail pharmacy or the site sends it in via a specific fax form to the specialty pharmacy that's been approved to handle that study's allocation of medications. Step four, the ARC study card immediately supplies the patient with what they need, because the pharmacy in step five is being transacted just like your insurance card and a copay, and it's paid immediately so that the pharmacy will release the patient to walk out with drug. So that's really what the ARC study card does. Again, just like an insurance card, the ARC study card provides very specific information all the way down to the patient level in a HIPAA compliant, PHI secure manner. All of this is being handled by pharmacies that are used to and accustomed to HIPAA and PHI. You can't get any higher security, if you will, than state pharmacy law guided by federal FDA law, right? So with that, that's really how this card works. It is not a debit card. There's no monetary value on the card. You're not giving patients free rein to buy things from a pharmacy while they're in their convenience shopping. This is only for what has been put on a formulary as specified by the protocol, which our clients always give us a copy of to be able to manage their study. So with that, this is the real benefit. So large, complex formularies on the top left are able to be had. Again, we've had up to 5,400 drugs on a formulary programmed in at one time. That provides for virtual inventory, where physical inventory is not needed to be purchased. So it eliminates all sourcing and purchasing. The top center, you can see that these high-priced items, biologics, rare disease drugs, no longer have to be purchased. There's no carrying cost for these drugs. The pharmacy purchases those, holds the liability, with exception to somebody wanting very dedicated inventory only for their purposes. That might be a place where we will work with the pharmacy to buy real-time inventory, pull it in from their wholesaler, knowing that there's a couple-day notice that needs to happen to be able to provide that product to the patient. All the cold chain goes away because the pharmacies manage it. The controlled substances, not an issue because it's again managed by the state and federal pharmacy regulations and laws. At the bottom of the screen, short expiry windows are taken care of because again, pharmacies manage the expiry. There's not clinical staff that has to manage that. And then back around to the bottom left, you can see that there's these specialty and limited distribution drugs. And quite frankly, we've had an explosion in the business that we do to this day with regard to limited distribution drugs, because as you all probably know as clinical supply people, most pharmaceutical companies may choose only 1, 2, or even 3 pharmacies nationwide to hold and distribute their product to keep a tight control on these medications that are very expensive and need to be handled very delicately. So with that, these specialty pharmacies manage all of that. We have a network of specialty pharmacies that help us to pull that product from inventory and utilize it for the clinical trial that they've initiated. So a lot to be said there. This next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the case study that we did. So we basically looked at really trying to look at three pieces: fewer process steps. How could we reduce the steps? How could we reduce the calendar time it takes? And then give back the employee, all of you that are on the call that are at a client, whether it be a CRO or a pharmaceutical or biotech company. This is what Gottlieb challenges to do. So we wanted to see if we could meet that challenge and how would we do. So these next 4 slides are going to look a little bit intense. So I'm going to go ahead and brace you now, tell you to brace yourselves, but they're not as inundating as you think. I'm going to draw your eyes to specific points of the slides to point these things out. How many steps did it take to do a study startup in the traditional mode compared to our virtual mode? How many weeks did it take to do this startup? And then what does that relate to in hours to each individual person that's listening to this call? And our panelists have actually experienced this, so they can speak to this when I ask them some more questions here in a few minutes. But then the hours demanded to ongoing supply, not just startup, which is difficult enough, but the ongoing supply that may continue. What we see on average is about a 34-month study. So four of our consultants looked at this and did a third-party analysis, and this is what they found. So again, it looks busy. It's a timeline. So if you look at the top blue bar, the 10 steps on the left green part of the screen are the steps that have to occur at the handoff after the protocol's been written, the feasibility's been conducted. You see this handoff, the sourcing vendors have been engaged. You're trying to get these RFPs done. You're collecting responses, analyzing all of that, determining who you're going to go with, and then you start placing orders. There's about 10 steps that all of our clinical supply pros told us really fit in there. And we're not trying to get into every little minutia step. We're trying to take the bigger buckets. In the middle of the screen, you'll see 4 additional steps. That's when you start to receive the product, that's been ordered, and it's going to be, then the drug is going to be delivered. And so here's this product receipt, the inspection of the product to make sure everything's okay, communications with your depot. Then there's the placing the product into inventory and creating the labels and getting everything back out. Then you can see in the second green box, the 4 steps are when you start to actually, package the product, review the records, QA release it. You've got the IRT load, and all your IRT vendors are either chosen and engaged. And then on the far right, you see that there's the formulary that's been shipped to the sites now. Everybody's getting their product while patients are being screened, recruited and screened. They should go in the proper order. So they're recruited and then they're screened, and they're able to then get the product, there to the site. So we tallied up about 20 steps that have to occur in the center white box of the screen. That's the setup, the process for setup. Now, when you look at TrialCard and what we do in the bottom left, in the blue box, there's 4 steps. You're going to take all the same information from the top left of the screen where you've drafted the protocol, done your feasibility, figured out what you need. We're going to estimate it for you. We're going to do that. We're going to forecast it with real-world data from IQVIA. We're going to use Medispan data, looking at the true cost of the drugs. And we're going to contract our specialty pharmacy when necessary. We're going to contract with you simultaneously. We're going to review and approve all the program collateral that will cause your staff as well as the sites to be trained properly, how to implement this with patients. And that's generally a fairly short call that we train them on what they need to do because the patient's already used to using an insurance card and going to a pharmacy. It's pretty much standard protocol in their daily life. What you see on the far right bottom is 16 fewer steps and an 80% reduction in the steps of startup. So this may be formulating some questions in your head. Write them down. We'll get to those at the Q&A here in just a bit. So now this next slide looks at calendar time. If we were to calendarize that same amount of time that you just saw with regard to steps, we put the number of business days on average for securing one drug. And that usually takes about 22 weeks with physical inventory. It takes us in the bottom left blue box about 6 weeks to set this program up. Now, we've done it shorter. I'm not going to make any promises, but we've done this in 2 to 4 weeks. We generally tell people 6 weeks is pretty comfortable to get things up and moving. We've reduced the number of weeks to startup by 16 fewer weeks, a 73% reduction in time to get these products available and on the market. When we look at that drilled down into the employee time, if you will, reducing it to the ridiculous and trying to bring it down to what does it mean to me, the person that has to manage this on a day-to-day basis, we see that that's brought down to about 33 employee hours just for study startup. At the startup phase, 33 hours will be used to acquire that one product and to make all those bullet points in the green and blue occur. With us, it takes you about 10 hours to manage us, work with us, to make sure that it's just the way you want it, that it meets your protocol, you approve those materials, and everything is rolled out. So at the startup period, it's 23 fewer hours, a 70% reduction will save you 3 work days of your life in doing so. And then maybe more important, or just as important as that startup, is just managing this for the resupply. So you'll see in the title slide, this is the employee time for resupply. All the same steps are there, but you'll notice that I highlighted some in white. And the ones in white are the things you have to continue to do for each drug. So if you have 3 drugs on formulary, you're going to need to do this 3 times. You're going to have to place the order for that particular drug, pay the invoices, and work through all those steps. When we calculated this up, it's about 120 hours over the life of the trial that you would need to manage that. When the patient is carrying that same card, taking a prescription into a pharmacy, what you really do is you're going to spend time basically working with us to review the program activity. There's really nothing more that you need to do. You can go focus on IMP. You can focus on making sure that you've got the other supplies, the things that are more critical, or in times like we're in right now, you can focus on how are you going to get the IP or IMP product back to the clinic or get it to the patient using these couriers, other folks that you need to. But we will save you roughly 140 fewer hours and a 95% reduction in the life of that study managing your commercial product. So it's about 14 work days, 3 weeks. So what I've done in this next slide is I summed all that up for you. And just to make it a little bit easier in your eyes, something you can kind of digest, this is really the net savings. It's about 87% of your time and effort that is saved over the life of a study when you use this for your commercially acquired products, which would be your comparators, standards of care, your rescue medications, ancillary supplies, and medical devices. Now, TrialCard is very aware that that's not what the study is all about. The study is really about your IP product and the placebo. What we're aiming to do is to be one piece of the puzzle that allows you to mitigate risk, stop the carrying cost, stop the waste of resources, to be able to manage the IP product and the placebo product, which is really the focus of your study. And we're trying to take this burden and a piece of this off of you. Not all studies use multiple products. But that kind of takes us really to my next question for our panelists. So Terry, we've been sharing a particular story about a particular program that's happened in the recent days, and I know that that's probably something we'll talk about here in just a minute in another case study. But we shared data that was prepared by global clinical supply consultants that have touched studies, in multiple countries. I'd love to hear what you think about the realities of this, and whether this is enough to say that yes, this meets Gottlieb's challenge, just in the time savings alone. And what are your thoughts about the data? Does it represent a truth, something that you witnessed? And how would you convey that to your other colleagues and peers that are on the phone?
Well, I think there's a couple points in that, Tom. The first is I think it absolutely is realistic, because the other thing the hours that you have to manage, and there's so many things within the supply chain as far as storing the product, changing the as you change it from quarantine to release, and all these little steps I'm sure that most of the people know about as they work through it, but it frees you up to do other things. I think that's a big part of the number. So if you said it was like the reduction in time you need to spend on the commercial supplies. Well, you can take the time and spend it more on the investigational supplies you have in house, or certain, other studies that work on, because as you mentioned early in the slide pack, how things are getting so, I wouldn't say difficult, but they're just changing and getting the clinical studies are just changing these days. They are more difficult and the more complicated, I think is the word to use. But, these are the things that really takes the time to figure out how to adjust to new ways of working. So, as Gottlieb said, you're looking at possibly going to decentralized trials. And that's especially important right now, because essentially we're being forced into decentralized trials without really having much time to prepare. But that's where, the patients aren't necessarily coming into the sites. So whether they're, as Rudy said, whether they're quarantined or the site's closed and things like that. So this, I think, it really would fit into that whole idea, as far as you're not worried about shipping medication to patients. I mean, if you can focus just on the IMP part of it, but otherwise they can go to the local pharmacies. And from what I've heard, the pharmacies haven't been closed because there's an essential business. So I think that would fit right in. Yeah. So I think that fits right in.
None of our pharmacies at the retail or the specialty level have closed. They're all open for business to take care of patients and healthcare providers as a whole. So that's a great point. Right. Well, let me flip this over. So Rudy, let me ask you, when you think about the number of days and hours represented, what we've put up here, you've experienced this firsthand. What are your thoughts? What stands out to you? What do you think would be inefficiencies that could be better managed here?
Yeah, the numbers you presented are real, and in fact, in some cases, they could be conservative. But keep in mind that, the number of hours that you applied there are per drug. I mean, if you have, 2 comparators in your study, and 2 different rescue meds and maybe 4 different supportive meds, now you're putting in all this time and additional resources that are really unnecessary. You can't get that time back, whereas, perhaps maybe you could scale back and leverage that time on more strategic things. I've seen this time and time again from various companies where, they're having to respin the wheel once, they place their first round of orders, having to manage that supply, and then they need to get another iteration of the same drug, but better expiry, and they go through the entire process, and they probably have to do that 3 or 4 times, maybe even more than that, for the duration of the study. If you can get some time back at the end of your day, and apply that to more strategic things, tasks, your company would be much better off.
Yeah, it's good to know. Well, one of the things I want you guys to think about, we'll ask it here at the end, is, when not all studies use commercial supply. So I'm going to plant a seed while I go through a couple more slides here. Not everybody uses commercial supply of different types of products that are commercially available. There's some pros and cons, and I'd like you guys to think about that while I share some additional slides here. For the audience, I'm going to go through a couple case studies that are real world, and let me take you there. And this is with regard to 4 particular trials. We'll probably only hit 3 here. The trial that never started, one that had supply interruption, and one where things go as planned. And if we can tackle the 4th, we will, but I'll be careful there. So this is the spot for our second polling question. Let me just stop and have Sonia go through the polling question, and then I'll tee up the slides for the case study.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you so much, Tom. Yes, it is time for our final polling question for this webinar. I'm going to launch it right now. I'll give you about 30 seconds to complete this. And the question is, what percentage of clinical drug supplies are consistently wasted by trial closeout? And you have a couple of options there. Please select 1 to 10%, 20 to 30%, 30 to 40%, 40 to 50%, or the last one is greater than 50%. Looks like we have half of our audience members participating in the poll. I'd really appreciate it if everyone could now cast their vote here, so I can close the poll and get back to the presentation. I'll give another 5 seconds. Looks like a lot of people are voting now. Okay, it looks like the majority of everyone has voted here, so that's perfect. Thank you so much for that. I'm now going to close the polls and share the results. And here are the results for that poll question. We have 0% for 1 to 10%, 18% 20 to 30%, 41% at 30 to 40%, and 23% at 40 to 50%, and 18% greater than 50%. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating in that poll question. Now I'm going to pass over the controls and mic back to Tom, Rudi, and Terry. You may begin.
So hopefully that information is one, maybe it's still a little startling in a day when we think we're more efficient and logistics are that much better. But I'm going to cut through these case studies fairly quickly. If you have questions, we're glad to always take questions later. But this is a trial that never started, a real-world evidence study. This was done with a large pharma conducting a respiratory trial. They had already done the setup process, recruited sites, and were trying to enroll patients. The goal was to provide patients with 12 months of standard of care respiratory inhalers. The problem they ran into in the real world was they had enrollment challenges. They had multiple screen failures. No patients were enrolled, and they terminated the study after just 6 months. This is what it looked like. I'm going to draw your attention to the bottom right-hand number. The number of units that would have been prepared for the study start alone was 5,000 units of inhalers. And they never got anybody enrolled, by the way. And this was with 200 sites, 1,300 patients was the initial goal. Ultimately, what happened here on this screen, the teal color shows the traditional purchase, what it would have cost just to start up at $68,000, physical inventory of $2.7 million for a total of $2.8 million. On the right-hand side, the blue portion, you can see that they paid the setup cost to us to get this study up and running. They were ready. All we needed was for patients to receive the RX study card and a prescription, go to the retail pharmacy, or have it home delivered, whichever they would have preferred, and they would have gotten the product, and it would have been real-time inventory, real-time payments out. Because they never purchased inventory, they didn't pay the $2.7 million out, and at the end of the day, they saved $2.8 million because it's the study that never started. They thought it was a great idea. The protocol just didn't work for whatever reason. Investigators didn't have patients readily available. Let me take you to case study number 2. This study was supply interruption that occurred during a phase 3 diabetes trial. And you all know that phase 3 is not where you want a trial to stop in the middle of it. After all the phase 1, phase 2 work, all the preclinical work, large pharma had required an entire NDC classes of brand and generic drugs. Can you guys see the screen? Just making sure. Okay, great. So the brand and generic drugs, rescue medications, and ancillary supplies were needed. This was the challenge. They had glucometers disappearing. They had them expiring. They had to throw away pallets of glucometers. When they went to find them from the manufacturer, they couldn't sell them anymore because they had to meet the trade demand. And that's a really key piece here, meeting the trade demand. All pharmaceutical companies are always going to sell to the trade anytime they can to keep it stocked because that's what keeps revenue coming in. At the end of the day, you can see that this was a large study with 1,293 patients. They were needing 2,700 or 27,000 units of product. And in the end, this is what happened. And I won't go through all the operational costs. You can see the bottom line. They would have spent $7 million for the product, but they had savings of $3.4 million because we were able to have them not repurchase product and not store product and not to destroy product again, but to be able to pull it directly from retail. Case study 3 was an oncology study in phase 2. In this particular case, they needed 2 very high dollar comparators that they needed pulled out of the limited distribution channel. They were $10,000 per cycle, and they had a very difficult time finding the products they needed to compare. So what the goal was basically to get the comparator meds, not to have to invest a bunch of upfront capital, and have this delivered directly as needed, either to a patient and or site. In this case, it was a particular site where they would administer the drug, and it resulted in 0 waste. So small study. You can see that it only had 23 patients. They needed 150 units for this particular drug. And while in upfront operational costs, because they wanted to buy dedicated inventory, they only saved $30,000 in the setup fees. They did save about $500,000 in virtual inventory versus the physical inventory. And overall, the study still saved $300,000. Very small study, but you can see that we served those patients well, and that's what they needed. So essentially, the ARC study card has demonstrated in 2 different types of studies that we analyzed, our time savings and our monetary savings and waste savings. And those aren't all of our case studies. We have about 8 case studies where people were willing to share their data in a more blinded fashion. But you can see that we saved time and we saved money in both of these scenarios. So with that, I'll move down. We're going to talk about COVID here again in just a second. But let me ask Rudi and Terry one more set of questions here. When thinking about what I mentioned earlier, not all studies, not all companies use commercially available product. When do you find it appropriate? What's the benefit of it? And Rudi, let's start with you.
Yes, hi. Not all companies, like you mentioned, not all companies use commercial drug products, and there are some benefits to that. Obviously, with the markup of the cost, and so initially when a commercial drug is available, usually there's limited supply. So it can be difficult obtaining, especially when you're trying to go out to the open market, because you're competing against hospitals and wholesalers and other sites that are purchasing the commercial drugs. So you have your challenges when it comes to the supply standpoint. The other thing too is factoring in your cost, right? If you're trying to if you're a small organization and you've got a tight budget for your study, going out and trying to get a commercial drug product can be very expensive, and it could actually destroy your budget.
Okay, that's good. So, Terry, let me ask you a different type of question, because you were so integral in decentralized studies at TrialCard. Can you just talk about maybe efficiencies that can be gained and what risks can be averted with decentralized studies or DTP models like this, where it's more virtual?
Oh, absolutely. I think it comes in. You bring up a good point, Tom. It's the risk. Shipping, putting all the logistics that we have to do, and the length of the supply chain. Some of them longer, some are shorter. But getting that material and putting it out there, whether it sits on a tarmac in Arizona or India in the middle of the hot season and things like that, where it gets up to 120, 30 degrees, or just the opposite when it sits in Minnesota and it can freeze on the tarmac. So I think one, it takes the risk out of it. 2, it shortens the supply chain, which is always a good thing, because basically the pharmacies are managing the inventory, not you. Don't have to manage the inventory. And for the diabetes study, to dispense the glucometers or dispense metformin or something common, it's a common product at the sites. There's all those, as you mentioned before, the carrying costs and and freeing you up to do other things. So I think there's a lot of benefits there. It's a virtual inventory, as you mentioned, at the decentralized part, because the inventory is managed at the pharmacies, so you don't have to worry about those details.
No, that's a really good point. It's very, very valid. And Rudi, I mean, I'm assuming similar for you. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I agree with Terry. I mean, I have really no further comments, but I agree with Terry and everything he said.
Great. Okay. Well, so I put up the slide again, just the impact of COVID-19, and I want to leave some time for questions. So I really want to be careful. So I'm going to put this slide up, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Sonia to open up for questions and what we need to do there. But these are just some of the impacts of COVID-19, right? Study disruptions, rapid change, need for additional NDCs they didn't think they needed, some co-medications maybe they hadn't thought of before, the fact that patients can't come into sites and medical centers. So maybe let's just leave those for some of the questions that might come up and see what happens there. With that, Sonia, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. I will now take control of the screen, and we'll start the Q&A session of this webinar. So thank you again, Terry, Rudi, and Tom, for that insightful and thought-provoking presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Now I would like to invite our audience to continue sending in their questions or comments right now using the questions window for the Q&A portion of the webinar. I've already received some questions, so I will start with those. So Rudi, Tom, and Terry, are you ready?
Yes.
Yes.
I feel like it's a race. Here we go. This is great for approved comparators or ancillary products. However, how exactly do you manage investigational product that does not yet have FDA approval?
Yeah, I think this is Tom. I'll take that question. We actually have our own specialty pharmacy where we will evaluate each opportunity to provide early access product, compassionate use product at that pharmacy, or if the client has a pharmacy that they prefer to work with or a vendor, we certainly, will evaluate and jump into that. But we can certainly provide product on consignment that we could then ship out in that vein. So I hope that answers the question.
Anyone else would like to comment? No? Okay, then I'll go on to the next question. How quickly can this type of supply service be implemented?
Rudi, can I pass that over to you?
This is Rudi. Yes, this is Rudi. So I've actually worked with TrialCard in my past life, and we were able to get our study started very rapidly. As you saw in the slides, it saves you a lot of time, and getting it implemented is just a matter of days, really. The best thing to do is to really, when you're in your design phase of your protocol, is to work with TrialCard so that they can be prepared for whatever's coming out. And, you could do all your negotiations, and then next thing you know, the RX study card is ready to go. So it's really in a matter of days. I mean, this is the quickest option when you're trying to get a study started really quick.
So I'm just going to say this. Rudi was the one that put us to the test, and we got something done for him in 2 weeks, but I don't prefer to do it that way. But Rudi did put us to the test, and we got it done for him right before Christmas 2-3 years ago. So yep.
Sorry to put you on the spot, Tom.
No, I appreciated the test.
Okay, here's the next question. How does this comply with HIPAA?
So I'll take that. We are ISO 27001 certified. Our entire environment is 100% HIPAA and PHI compliant. It's one of the top 5 certifications that you can get with regard to HIPAA and PHI. And again, remember that all of this is managed through a pharmacy, which has to comply with state and federal law, which I don't believe, and I certainly don't want to offend a compliance person, but even internal compliance rules and regulations are just lumped on and are additive to state and federal law. And so the pharmacy dispensing is utmost private. And so I'll leave that to maybe Terry. I don't know if you want to comment any further on that.
Actually, it's great, Tom. Thanks. Because it is, the pharmacist dispensing medications, a healthcare professional, an HCP. So we are all covered under, the HIPAA regulations. We sign agreements with the individual patients, the little signing tablets you sign when you're picking up your prescriptions. And the other part is also the back end. The patient information, when you're looking at the card information, so the NDC number of what got dispensed, the day's supply, things like that on the back end, and you're just confirming compliance. You don't have to get into all the other medications. That's not shared. Like all the other medication that the patient's on, for example, in the system, the pharmacy system. So there's a lot, as Tom mentioned, there was a lot of HIPAA rules and the guidelines that are followed and backed upon by the fact that you're not sharing the detailed information of the patient's full medical history and medication history.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's see if we could squeeze in a couple more questions here. Here's the next one. Has there been any studies about how overage study supplies can be used for other studies?
If the drug has been put into our specialty pharmacy and it's been a drug that's been utilized via our specialty pharmacy network, and that pharmacy has good dating on it, they can hold that product and they can use it for another subsequent study. by the same client, that pharmacy, quote unquote, or technically owns the product, and you don't. That's part of the benefit of working with us. Therefore, if they did have some bit of overage, they could potentially put it to work. Since it never left the chain of custody in the pharmacy, it can be utilized again. The problem with doing this, moving product from site to site or into a site, is once it's left at healthcare providers' hands at the pharmacy chain of custody, that product can no longer be used with another patient. You don't know who's touched it, tampered with it, or what conditions it's been in. But if it stayed in that pharmacy, or a specialty pharmacy or a retail pharmacy, it can be reutilized.
And it's not your product. So that's one of the benefits.
Correct.
Yeah, it's the virtual supply. So you're not prepaying for the inventory ahead of time. You're as you go.
Yeah, if I can add to that, one of the polling questions was, how much drug do you have at the end of the trial that goes to waste? And there was not a single response that had 0 to 10%. So, leveraging TrialCard, you can actually achieve that 0 to 10%.
Excellent point.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Here's our next question. Who manages study order approval for comparators? Is it on the sponsor, or will TrialCard facilitate the approval?
I'm sorry, can you read that one more time? I didn't hear the first part of that. Sonia, can you read that one more time?
No problem. It says here, who manages the study order approval for comparators? Is it on the sponsor, or will TrialCard facilitate the approval?
Okay, thank you. It's really the design of the study. So if you're using comparators in the open label fashion and dispensing them as needed, via the pharmacy, via the card, it's really that you don't really need to manage the inventory, because once again, it's virtual. So you pay as you go. Whereas if you're in a study where it's a double-blind study and you're using the comparator within, and you're bringing it into the company or the depot, the sponsor, and at that point, that's where where the company gets involved in working out quantities and things like that, and expiry dates.
Okay. Anyone else like to add to that?
No, I think that's good, and I know we're at 2 o'clock, so we should probably wrap. But
yeah, I could squeeze in one more question if you like, because I know you guys have a lot of information to share. Would you like one more, and then I'll just close up after that?
Well, I think, why don't we do this, Sonia? If we could, I've got the contact information up. If anybody does have a question they ask and it didn't get answered, please feel free to reach out to me. And if I need to put you in touch with one of our 2 panelists, I'll do so. But just out of respect for time, let's do that. And there you go. Thank you so much, Sonia. But and I really appreciate everybody, especially your guests, for being here, and X-Talks people for putting this on.
No problem. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate your time. We have reached, as Tom just mentioned, we have reached the end of the question and answer portion of the webinar. If we couldn't attend to your questions, which we've done, the team at TrialCard may follow up with you after the presentation. If you have further questions, direct them to the email address on your screen where you see it right there, tom.heck@trialcard.com, or you can reach them at 919-415-3155. Thank you, everyone, for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from X-Talks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is appreciated, as it will help us to improve on our further webinars. Now, I'm about to send you a link in your chat box. You'll be able to view the recording of this event at that link, and also share this link with your colleagues who are not able to attend today's webinar, and they can do that when they register for the recording as well. So I encourage you to do that. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers, Terry, Rudi, and Tom, for their presentation. We hope you found this webinar informative. It has been my pleasure to be your webinar moderator. On behalf of the team here at X-Talks, we thank you for joining us. I'm Sonia Hunt. Until next time, take care and bye for now.